Hi everyone, my name is Mariam Gizani. I'm a PhD student at Oregon State University, and today I'll be presenting our paper, Attracting and Retaining OSS Contributors with a Maintainer Dashboard. This paper was part of a research internship at Microsoft Research in summer 2021 at the SEIS team. A healthy, sustainable OSS project depends on a healthy contributor base. However, attracting and retaining new contributors is challenging. For instance, new contributors have a hard time finding a starter task. They also struggle with transitioning from being a newcomer to becoming more of a regular contributor or a core contributor. In fact, even after newcomers have contributed to the project, retaining them is non-trivial. In some projects, as high as 80% of these contributors do not transition to long-term contributors. There's also the challenge of goal mismatching, when the contributor's goals and the project's goals do not match. Maintainers' burnout is a challenge, and maintainers tend to have a limited time. So we aim to provide project and community growth recommendations to help attract and retain contributors. We scope our study to build an intervention to help attract and retain new contributors, as this group is essential in ensuring a constant flow of contribution in a sustainable community. To do this, we first do the dashboard design. We leveraged prior literature to prioritize the recommendations to be included in our dashboard. We also worked closely with OSS experts, OEs, who understand the project practices and communicate regularly with OSS participants. This resulted in the design of project growth recommendations, which help attract new contributors. These project growth recommendations act on the project artifacts, for example, files or issue lists, and also a community growth recommendation to help retain these contributors. These community growth recommendations act upon contributors' profile, example, badges. We used Python and the GitHub API to implement our dashboard functionalities. For our dashboard evaluation, we first randomly selected 71 open source for social good projects from a prior literature. Open source for social good projects are projects where the outcome distinctly targets a community of people to overcome a societal issue. We used open source for social good projects for our evaluation since prior work has shown that open source for social good projects attract contributors who are interested in a broader impact, and also tend to attract contributors from minority groups. We also made sure that the projects we selected had data for community growth recommendations. For example, if a project did not have any newcomer activity in the past 6 months, we could not use it for the community growth recommendations, and thus that project was not selected. For the recruitment, we reached out to maintainers of these projects via email. And we had 8 interviews confirmed. The interview materials consisted of project-specific dashboards for each one of the interviews and the script for the interview. We ran interviews which were audio recorded and transcribed, and then we qualitatively analyzed the data to understand how maintainers evaluated our dashboard. Let's start with the project growth recommendations to help attract new contributors. Here, we show the resulting dashboard design for project growth recommendations. The goal of the first recommendation was to highlight starter tasks. So here, what we used is newcomer-friendly issue labels recommendations. We used issue tracker data and string matching against a set of newcomer-friendly issue labels curated from 187 repos in 22 programming languages. The second recommendation aimed at highlighting project goal. And here we used open source for social good tags recommendations from both OVIO and SDG websites. Now on to the maintainer feedback. Maintainers did report that the newcomer-friendly issue labels recommendation helped signal a welcoming project. For instance, maintainer 2 mentions it helps people getting into the project, and that it also helps provide a gentle nudge to take action. However, maintainers also mentioned that applying this recommendation would depend on project characteristics, like the development state of the project. For example, milestones, refactoring, release dates. For instance, Maintainer 2 mentioned how it's tricky because we are having pretty strict timelines and milestones and prioritizations. So sometimes a project is under some strict deadlines where they might not even have issues that could be tackled by a newcomer. To help with this, maintainers recommended adding a Remind Me Later feature to help them get to this at a later time when the project is not under such strict deadlines and when they have some breathing room. Now for the open source for social good tag recommendation, maintainers reported that it would increase visibility, making the project more visible. They also like these in terms of them being meta tags that would allow the project to be more contextually meaningful. They also mentioned that it would help attract diverse contributors and users. As for the contributors, it would engage a broader spectrum, but it would also help attract users. Maintainer 8 mentions there's this project out there that can be interesting and useful to you. Never mind contributing to it, but use it. Now let's look at the community growth recommendation to help retain newcomers. Here, we show the resulting dashboard design for the community growth recommendation. The goal of the community growth recommendation is to recognize active newcomers. We define newcomers as contributors that joined the project in the last 6 months prior to the interview and have not contributed to the project before. We show the newcomer joining activity and retention trend in this graph, where we can see the number of newcomers that were active in a particular month, that have joined in a particular month, and in green that have been retained from the previous month. We also identify and recommend rising contributors and recommend adding a batch of rising contributors to these newcomers that have been active. Now on to the dashboard evaluation. What did the maintainers think? Maintainers agreed that this would help them recognize contributors. For instance, Maintainer 8 said, it's nice to acknowledge people's work if we have a system that helps do that. Maintainers also mentioned that this would depend on the contribution model. For instance, Maintainer M2 says, this would be pretty cool for us in specific circumstances, like if we have someone who is voluntarily working on the project. So some maintainers suggested that it would be interesting to add a filter by team membership so that they could see who is being paid for contributing to the project versus who are volunteers. They also said that they would use this as a hiring mechanism, especially that if somebody who's volunteering to the project is making consistent contribution, they could end up hiring that person because they already have the skills and knowledge to contribute. Maintainers also mentioned that this helps understand contributors' activity because it gives a fast overview about who's coding for the project and who's creating issues. So they were interested in seeing what kind of contributions the contributors are making. Especially that a lot can happen, particularly with new developers before commit. Maintainers also mentioned that this would help understand the overall activity, to help see that the community is growing. Maintainers also saw a different use for this. Maintainer M3 mentions this would give an interesting set of data points if you're having some hackathons, events, or conferences. As a conclusion, we performed a first step towards a systematic mechanism to help take proactive actions toward OSS community's health and sustainability. We designed and evaluated a dashboard that provides recommendations for maintainers to help attract and retain new contributors. A key feedback is to take into account project's characteristics, such as the contribution model, especially in a more hybrid OSS environment where there's a mix of paid and unpaid contributors. And also the current development cycle of the project. For instance, if there are upcoming releases or if the project is undergoing some restructuring. In the future, we could link into retaining core contributors and detecting potential maintainers. All in all, it is important to continue to listen to maintainers to better understand what tools and support they need, via maintainers listening tours and industry conferences that help foster industry and academia collaboration. Thank you for watching.